Let me know when
Yeah, we can see your screen.
you can. Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation today to speak to you. I really wish I was there in person, but I come to you today from my home in France to share with you a little bit about the Advancing Net Zero project from the World Green Building Council, the whole life vision that we have set out, and the work happening across the world to reach that vision. So first of all, I don't think I need to spend too much time on this next slide. We are very much aware that we are in a climate crisis, and we're dealing with several global crises at the moment, but climate change is very much still there and it's very real. And we are seeing increasing frequency and severity of climate change events around the world. We know that buildings are responsible for a huge amount of global carbon emissions, nearly 40%. And so we as a sector have a responsibility to make sure that we are doing the utmost that we know is necessary to ensure we're reducing our resource consumption and creating structures that are fit for purpose for the future. So the World Green Building Council has responded to this challenge. Following the Paris Agreement, as has been outlined in the introductions, it's very obvious that we need to be taking radical steps to decarbonize all sectors, but the building and construction sector, we have a vision to accelerate uptake of net zero carbon buildings to 100% by 2050. And so the Advancing Net Zero project was established to help drive that target and to help support the green building councils around the world in delivering different initiatives in their markets, such as the ones underway by Mauritius Green Building Council. So the project is increasing awareness and education of the urgency and achievability of net zero carbon buildings. We are working to achieve alignment and commonality across the different Green Building Council approaches and certification schemes and rating tools around the world, because there are lots of different rating tools, but they all mean slightly different things. So this way we can bring them all together around a net zero goal. And then finally, to expedite uptake in global markets by sharing leadership examples in events such as the one you are hosting today. The World Green Building Council has a whole life carbon vision that by 2050, new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon. And all buildings, including existing buildings, must be net zero operational carbon. Now, this vision combines the concepts of operational carbon, how buildings are actually performing in use, and embodied carbon, because in order to address our carbon emissions from our sector, we need to be not just thinking about how much energy we're consuming, but where is that energy coming from? What are the sources of energy? You could have a very efficient building, but it's powered with fossil fuel-based energy, and that for us is not what we need in order to decarbonize our sector. So to help support the delivery of this vision, we have set definitions for what we mean by net zero operational carbon, net zero embodied carbon, and then a series of guiding principles to help drive those forward. So for example, for operational carbon, we are talking about in-use, measured and disclosed metrics for energy performance and carbon. So it's important to make sure we're bringing green buildings into the market, but now we need to be looking at net zero buildings. So not just sort of defining what a green building is or what a building is that does less harm at the design stage or the construction stage, but actually monitoring and measuring how it performs in use. And so thinking about the performance metrics of that project, how much energy should it consume in a year, and how many carbon emissions should it be responsible for, and disclosing that data so that we can help refine it and reduce the emissions. Prioritizing energy efficiency, generating the balance from renewables, as we've heard, the two go together. So energy efficiency and renewable energy on site where you can, and then buying from off-site sources where that's possible, and offset as a final resort. And then expanding that scope. So some green building councils around the world, including those in Africa, are thinking about other impact areas as well for sustainable development, such as water consumption, waste, and embodied carbon. So we included the definition of embodied carbon in a report that we released last year called Bringing Embodied Carbon Upfront. And the idea of that report was to bring awareness around, I think the previous speaker was mentioning the time value of money, but actually we're bringing attention to the time value of carbon. So we're building lots of new buildings. Between now and 2060, the global building stock is expected to double. So we also need to be thinking about the carbon emissions that are associated with the materials and construction processes for those buildings, because those emissions are happening right now and cannot be recovered in the future. So we need to be making better decisions around whether we need to build new buildings, so prevent the use of materials. Can we refurbish existing buildings to start with? Then if we do need to build new buildings and infrastructure, then how do we make sure that the emissions are reduced and optimized? So different material choices, different material locations, how does it get moved from A to B? What are the manufacturing processes like? Can they optimize renewable energy, for example? Planning for the future, so thinking about adaptability of structures, how they can be changed so that they can extend their building lifetime, and deconstructability, so we don't need to demolish buildings once they've reached the end of their useful life, but we can actually deconstruct them and maximize the reuse and circularity of materials. And then finally, offset. So again, it's going to be necessary as part of this transition, but offset schemes that are verified and have the right intentions really can help us drive to a net zero economy. So I'm going to touch very briefly on some definitions. I think it's been covered before, but it's important to understand where we're coming from and why we use the term net zero carbon. If we start with the baseline of a building, so this would be the energy consumption that a building is expected to use over each year if it was built to local regulatory requirements, if you built to the minimum requirements. And then if you introduced energy efficiency measures, if you thought about passive measures such as the orientation of the building to maximize natural daylight but decrease the amount of heat gain, if you maximize natural ventilation, for example, insulation, then and also have efficient active measures such as air conditioning, then that can really help bring down the consumption, reduce the demand, and mean that you have a more energy efficient building than might be required or acceptable with baseline code. If you can meet some of that energy demand with on-site renewable energy, such as solar panels, then you would have a nearly zero energy building. So you've, in addition to reducing consumption, you're providing some of that energy with renewable sources. If you can provide 100% of the energy you need in a year, then that makes it a net zero energy building. But that energy is generated on-site or within the boundary of the site. But we know that's not possible for every building around the world, every location, every building type, where there just simply isn't the financial model and the justification for installing on-site renewables. In some markets, they do exist, and so buildings can actually produce more than what they need in the course of a year, and that would make them energy positive. And actually, some markets allow you to then export that energy to buildings within the area or back to the grid. And that would be an energy positive building. But our definition includes the procurement of off-site renewable energy from within your country or from around the world through renewable energy certificates or power purchase agreements, so that you are making sure that where you are procuring renewable electricity, where you need electricity for your building, then it's from renewable sources. And then finally, as an offset, if you still need to use, for example, fossil fuel-based grid electricity or on-site gas combustion or diesel combustion, for example. And so that would allow you to have over the course of a year a balance of net zero carbon emissions, which is a more appropriate definition for the majority of buildings around the world. So speaking of around the world, here are some examples of green building councils that are embracing the net zero concept and are developing different certification schemes and programs and frameworks and initiatives to help drive the uptake of net zero buildings in their market. And I'm really pleased to hear from the earlier speakers about some of the progress that's been made within Mauritius specifically. The foundations that you've laid through the work that you've done, I'd just like to thank you, because being able to bring the concepts of net zero to the market, none of these initiatives existed 3 years ago when this project started. And it's all because the market is getting used to the concepts of green buildings, that the gap between green buildings or more sustainable buildings and net zero is getting smaller. And so companies are really embracing the concepts of net zero. And some of these countries, when we first started this project, said that net zero wasn't possible or achievable or even relevant for their markets. And now they have their own net zero strategies. So the idea is that green building councils take the framework that I set out earlier with those guiding principles and that vision, and figure out what that means for their markets. And if they want to, they can create a certification scheme, or they can adopt an existing one, such as EDGE, the zero carbon certification from EDGE, and make sure that it's delivered in a way that's appropriate to your market. So different metrics, different focus areas. In Singapore, for example, where it's really difficult to generate enough renewable energy simply because of a lack of land and the really high density sort of built up areas within Singapore, their targets are for super low energy. So making buildings as efficient as possible, generate on site where you can, in anticipation for a future decarbonized energy grid. So this kind of idea of net zero ready, preparing buildings to go as far as you can, the most efficient as you possibly can. Because that's where everything is heading. Regulation, financial investments, it's absolutely on its way. So a few global trends. We're seeing lots of new tools and resources over the past couple of years that are helping design teams and developers create the sorts of decisions that can help them with different sorts of investments in sustainable buildings, green buildings, and net zero projects as well. And it brings that decision making into the market, into the design context. So you can see in real time the impact of design decisions on the energy performance and the carbon performance of that building over its lifetime. And you can put in different scenario modelings to say, okay, energy costs this now, but what if it costs this in 10 years time? What will that do to our return on investment that we're making today? If we put extra windows in, what will that do to the heat gain and therefore the size of the air conditioning system to have to compensate for that? And the same with embodied carbon as well, being able to track and identify the carbon miles of different materials and products that you're specifying, and be able to make a decision based on a carbon budget for a project or an energy budget, not just a financial budget. So how much of our carbon budget for this project is that particular floor tile using, for example? This type of approach, this performance-based approach, requires really intensive collaboration and integration across design teams to make sure that everyone's working towards a common vision. Unfortunately, net zero doesn't have a single solution. If you're really embracing energy efficiency and renewable energy, you'll find that bespoke roadmap for that building or that portfolio, but there is no single sort of blueprint that I can share with you that says, here's how you do it. It's very much a building by building, and also improving the performance of existing buildings to make sure that they're also contributing to a decarbonized sector. But we do encourage people to commit to action, not just to sort of say that you'll do something or sign pledges, but actually make sure you are delivering on those commitments and those pledges, and making sure you're making a genuine reduction to your carbon footprint. And also to consider the broader value proposition. And we've just had a presentation that talks about risk, which is fantastic, and the sort of considerations that need to be made for potential higher upfront investment for net zero buildings. We are seeing that value proposition get stronger and stronger, the business case be a lot stronger, the cost of implementing these solutions is coming down as more and more people are embracing the concepts of net zero. But I'd just like to share with you this phrase that we use a lot in the sector, which is, if you cannot afford an efficient building, then you cannot afford an inefficient building. So it's important to understand what the costs are associated with introducing more efficient systems, or maybe additional consultants to help you ensure you're having a high performance building. That might mean some small incremental additional cost premium to the upfront investment of that project, but you need to be thinking about what that means for the long-term performance of the project. And if you need to be able to invest that at the beginning to make sure that you will reap those rewards over the course of the project. And depending on what position you sit on within the value chain, whether you're a developer or a tenant, there are benefits to embracing net zero. And we're seeing all over the world, and particularly the news from New Zealand recently around them requiring investors to report on their climate risk, right? It's now shifting from not just what is your return on investment, but what is your risk of inactivity? So what can you afford to not do this? And that's really strongly coming through the investment community. So really pleased to hear that being talked about this afternoon, where you are. And so here's an example. It's a couple of years old now, but I think a really powerful graphic from the Rocky Mountain Institute that sort of talks about, yes, there might be an incremental a premium to the construction cost for creating a net zero building, but actually an enhanced sale value and rental premiums, and in potentially operating cash flow through being able to export the renewable energy that's generated on the building. That actually overall you could have a really strong investment case there. But looking beyond the financial case, making sure that you have assets that are not stranded in the future, that are still fit for purpose, that people want to occupy. You have healthy schools and comfortable homes that don't cost a fortune to operate. That it means you have maybe higher productivity from your staff, and so it affects a much broader value proposition than just the financial case. So I'd really encourage you to think beyond just those metrics of the financial cost. So the good news is that net zero, we are seeing net zero buildings all over the world, from mosques in Jordan in the top left corner there to entire precincts in Sydney of Australia, affordable housing in the bottom left, and in the bottom right, that's a stadium in Brazil that was renovated to be net zero and had all those solar panels on the roof that generates enough energy to supply 200 homes around the area of the stadium. So we know that it's possible, the technology is here, and through our commitment, our net zero carbon buildings commitment, we have 110 businesses, cities, states and regions who are committed to delivering on net zero targets by 2030, and governments to enact regulation for all buildings to be net zero by 2050. We just announced 10 new signatories this year, ranging from small and medium enterprises, small firms with a couple of buildings, to big, massive companies like JLL. And it really sends a good signal that there is a strong case out there for embracing net zero and delivering on those action plans. So I just wanted to finally make a mention for Embodied Carbon and the potential for our sector to make these changes, particularly, as I say, with the new buildings that are being created. Our sector is responsible for 39% of energy-related emissions. 28% of that comes from building operations. So that's both residential and commercial, and it's both direct, so generated on-site through on-site combustion, and indirect, that's bought from the grid. So it's a huge chunk of emissions that we are responsible for as a sector for the energy used to heat and cool, light and power our buildings. The 11% that's left is from the construction industry, so from the materials and the construction processes that go into the building of the building in the first place, but also its maintenance and its renovation and its upkeep during its lifetime. And so as we're reducing the emissions from our building operations by making them more efficient and supplying them by renewable energy, actually that proportion is set to be more like 50-50 in the next few years. So it's really important that we're also addressing the emissions from the supply chain as well. But if we think outside the building sector, concrete, steel and aluminium as materials alone are responsible for over 22.5% of emissions. So it really dwarfs what the construction industry in the total is responsible for, but that's because it supplies other industries as well. And so we as the construction sector have a huge and important role to play in creating the demand for low carbon alternatives to these materials. And we're seeing pledges from concrete companies to make carbon positive cement and carbon positive steel production. So that's a fantastic signal already from the market that is encouraging. And so we as the sector can help increase that by asking for low carbon alternatives to concrete and steel and other materials, requesting environmental performance declarations from your suppliers. If you're a manufacturer, do you know how much, what the carbon footprint is of your products? Because your customers will start to ask for them. And can you identify, based on that data, what measures you can make to help reduce those emissions? So we do as a sector have a huge responsibility to help drive far more than the 39% that we're directly responsible for. So that's everything from me. For a final mention to World Green Building Week, as you heard in the introduction, it is our biggest campaign ever. We have held more than 300 events across the world, all about net zero buildings, promoting and highlighting why they're important for resilient and healthy communities, for the health of our planet, but also for strong economies as well. And so we've been calling on governments to implement bolder and more ambitious regulation for net zero buildings. We've been highlighting examples of action from all over the world, all throughout the week. And it will continue long after this week with all the resources that you can find on our website. So thank you again to Mauritius Green Building Council for hosting this event, for inviting me to speak to you today. And please do get in touch if you have any questions about the program or how we can help you. Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate, for an interesting presentation. And I think the reception was quite good. It looked as if you were already here and sharing your experience. We would like to now continue with the next presentation, which is also, and I'm sure you will be, you would like to remain online, and then we'll do a question and answer session after the next presentation. So, yes. Yeah. I will now, I think we'll just bring online the next speaker of today, Kate Roger. So, who's going to speak also on the informed intelligent decision for resilience in a changing planet. Yes, so good afternoon, Kate, from our side, from the MRIC and GBCM, and over to you now for your presentation. Were we on mute? No.
We just have to tell them.
I think you have to unmute. No, maybe we can unmute.
It will have to unmute.
Yeah.
Can you see my slide now?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Great. With the Sylvest logo?
Yes.
Perfect. I just want to double check that it's the slide you're seeing, not my notes. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I also, as Victoria said, I'm very jealous that I'm not in Mauritius at this stage. I'm dialing in from London. So my name is Kate Roger, and I'm the head of customer and partner development at Sylvest, a London-based climate tech company. And as Tony mentioned earlier, we met actually just last week through the Google for Startups SDG program. I'm going to use this opportunity to tell you more about what we do at Sylvest and why. And hopefully some of our work will resonate with you in the audience. And I'd love to connect with people who see value or believe there are collaboration opportunities. Before I begin, I'd just like to extend my gratitude to both the Green Building Council of Mauritius and the MRIC for inviting me to present today, and for creating the space and highlighting the importance of quick action when it comes to climate resilience. I thought the welcome addresses were inspiring, and I'm glad to hear that climate is at the top of your agenda, and that there's also budget secured for research and development, because that is our area of expertise, and we believe in the R&D side to help us create a more resilient planet. So to start, the story of Subest actually started in Ghana 10 years ago, where our founder and CEO, Iggy Bassi, built an integrated agribusiness, a rice farm, and started to experience firsthand the volatility of extreme climate events. In Iggy's case, a 1 in 100-year event, a windstorm, flattened a mill worth $6 million. And then shortly after, a flash flood destroyed an entire season's crop. For Iggy, this exposed the gap between the microclimate problem and then the macro climate problem, and the micro decisions we all make as individuals. Iggy wondered whether artificial intelligence, specifically, could help us decode climate uncertainty. So when Iggy returned from Ghana, he started his research journey in AI and climate decisions. And that's how Subest was born. Subest was set up in 2016 and was created to bridge the gap between climate awareness and making better everyday decisions, with a burning mission to empower everyone to make informed climate decisions through our Earth Science AI platform. I have included an animation to give you a little bit more of a visual, high-level view about what we're doing, also so I don't speak for too long and you get bored of my voice. Hopefully you're able to hear the video, and if it isn't possible, please can someone let me know.
Hi, Kate, we're not getting any sound.
Sorry, you're unable to hear that?
No.
Okay, no problem. I will move on. I was going to try and test it, but if it doesn't work, I will do my best to explain it without the use of an animation. So the problem, we've touched on it in other presentations earlier today, whether it's farms in Ghana, sugarcane farms in Mauritius, power plants in Australia, or forests in California. Greater climatic volatility is affecting all of our world's assets, economies, and societies. These kind of damages manifest in supply chain disruption, financial losses. For the global 500 companies alone, there's an estimated $970 billion of assets at risk, with $250 billion linked to asset impairments or write-offs. Another example of how climate volatility is affecting us is global migration, food security threats, and in extreme cases, conflict. Now more than ever, businesses and governments are recognizing the fundamental need to understand, quantify, and respond to climate risk. So organizations, organizations and governments, irrespective of size, sector, or geography, are struggling to quantify the magnitude and timing and impact of climate risk at an asset level. Put differently, they can't personalize climate risks to be decision useful. There are three main obstacles and reasons to improved asset level decision making. The first, scientifically, it is exceptionally hard to quantify asset level climate impact. There is huge data chaos and modeling complexity, and climate science models sit in silos. The second is the world's scientific data is not at asset scale. It's not relative to a building, leading to crude forecasts not suitable for enterprise grade risk management. And then thirdly, there's a lack of standards. There's no universal standards for asset level climate risk that is science-based, global, and independent. I'd also add that there is action paralysis. This is actually mainly due to the models not being personalized. As soon as it's brought down to the individual or to one particular asset, the house you own, the company you invest in, the farm you work on, the factory you're reliant on, that's when people are kickstarted into acting now. So at Sevest, we personalize climate risk with streaming asset level intelligence. So anyone can quantify asset level climate risk anywhere on Earth for any timescale or scenario, all at the click of a button. Sevest is automating on-demand climate intelligence that feeds into everyday asset level decisions, both strategic and operational. We're not a consultancy, but a platform that can act as a decision support tool to make climate informed decisions, both in the short term and the long term. So our platform allows users to get personalized asset level analysis that's both on demand and real time. Users of our platform can baseline their assets and their portfolios by looking back at historical data over the past 40 years. So what has happened to this building over the past 40 years? They can analyze and monitor expected climate and weather risk through short-term and long-term forecasting. So the short term is a 46-day forecast, long term is 2080. And users can measure and assess the locational physical risk on their assets across multiple hazards. The hazards that we have on our platform are currently, we have 8 hazards, are wildfire, storms, coastal flooding, sea level rise, water stress, and extreme heat. The type of decisions we aim to supercharge through our platform and our API are operational resilience and planning. So understanding the short-term risks to fulfillment or supply chain optimization, understanding where the climate could impact a shortage or a surplus of an item, and also building a strategy to mitigate business interruption or financial losses. This can also feed into location planning and CapEx planning. The other type of decisions we aim to supercharge are finance and investment decisions, aid sourcing decisions, pricing of risk and commodities, and also help companies disclose according to the TCFD framework. For those of you that don't know, the TCFD framework is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is a framework of recommended requirements for businesses to start to disclose their climate risk. Ultimately, we want to help companies and governments improve asset outcomes by building their resilience, accelerating their net zero, cost savings, disclosure, and transparency with their whole entire value chain. So how does it work? Step 1, users identify their assets on the platform. Today, we have over 500 million buildings on our platform, and by Q1 next year, we aim to have 1 billion queryable assets on the platform, and this is globally. Step 2, a user can track and share their real-time intelligence on those assets. And step 3, they can integrate intelligence into those everyday decisions to help them with strategic decisions or operational decisions. The initial product that brings us together is called Sevest EarthScan, which we're currently providing to early adopters, and would love to test that out with many of you. We believe everyone deserves climate security, so we're also making sure that there is an open access platform so any users can make personalized and informed decisions on climate. This is an example of a recent client we've been working with. This client is a global hotel chain with over 8,000 hotel assets. Some of these are current hotels and some of them are potential acquisitions. These hotels are in over 70 countries worldwide, including Mauritius. And this client has signed up to TCFD, the recommended framework for climate-related financial disclosure. And we were able to provide them with a quantified view of their physical climate risk for each hotel, so each of the 8,000 hotels, and then a total aggregated view. So for each hotel, we gave the client a view of 8 climate hazards, 6 timescales, so that was between now and 2050, and 2 climate scenarios, a 2-degree climate scenario and a 4-degree climate scenario. The next step for this client is to start to look at the direct financial impact of climate hazards. The client will take this data for disclosure purposes, but it will also take them to identify hotels at risk, look at mitigating damage through preventative measures, putting in infrastructure in place to improve the resilience of their buildings, and make sure they incorporate climate risk into any investment decisions. So how do we do this? We're helping scale, well, what's the backbone of our platform is something called Earth Science AI. It's our proprietary methodology, and it fuses 3 things. The first thing is machine learning and artificial intelligence, which includes computer vision to analyze remote sensing data, that's satellite imagery, and Bayesian statistics. The second piece of Earth Science AI is which includes meteorology, geophysics, atmospheric science, and hydrology. And then the final piece of Earth Science AI is data engineering to automatically stream real-time climate intelligence on all different types of assets all over the world. Our Earth Science AI, in particular our Bayesian framework, allows models to adapt its probabilities as the data changes. We create a stream of probabilities that adapt as we start to add in new data and new data sets. This allows us to tie together the different sciences through maths, providing a level of certainty and uncertainty. With this information, users can calculate historic, forecasted, and simulated risks on any physical asset on the planet. I've talked a lot about assets, and obviously I'm talking about buildings, factories, farmland, but our biggest asset for Sebest is we're a small team, but we're a team of 37 impatient optimists and leading experts based in the UK, Europe, and US. Actually, since COVID, we've a first business. So I'm sat in my flat in London, which has led us, kind of opened up opportunities to start to hire the best talent anywhere in the world. Climate is a global problem, and we need the best in the world to help us build a more resilient planet. We've built partnerships with some of the best artificial intelligence researchers, most notably in the UK, the Alan Turing Institute, Imperial College London, and the University of Oxford. And what unites us all in a single vision is a single vision to restore the planet for informed climate decisions. To be a scalable platform that addresses this market on a global scale, we also need a scalable commercial model. We have an enterprise version of our EarthScan product, which grants customers the ability to use our climate risk assessment capabilities across all of their organization's assets anywhere globally. And as we start to move into 2021 and 2022, we'll add new features that enhance a user's ability to understand and act upon their risk exposure. An example of some of these features are adding financial impact on assets and asset risk benchmarking. But alongside our premium offering, our basic offering is being launched towards the end of Q4 and will be free to use. This will be a world first. We're giving anyone insights into the relationship between climate hazards and their assets of interest, served up by a single and engaging UI. So in closing, imagine what our planet would be if all decisions we make are optimized for climate. I'd like to ask yourself, how secure will my building or assets be in the next 5 years? Sebest can enable billions of decisions to be made every day that are informed by climate. For this community on the call, we welcome the theme of Act on Climate. We believe that to create greener, more resilient buildings, a key step is to understand their exposure and climate's future impact on each building. We welcome the opportunity to collaborate with partners and make this a reality across Mauritius. We also look to work with local researchers to test our data and validate our data. So I know we're about to move into questions, but please do get in contact. My email's on the screen here now. We're really interested in talking about new opportunities. And lastly, thank you for the opportunity to speak. And thank you for being part of our journey to deliver climate security for all. I'll stop there.